Hi, this is Manos Brilakis, and this is case 187 for the Manual of CTO Interventions. This is a case illustrating the importance of the safety wire during engagement of the donor vessel in CTO PCI. The patient was a woman who presented with angina. She was found to have a CTO of the proximal left anterior descending artery. The distal vessel was filling through septal collaterals from the right coronary artery and was diffusely diseased. So we have a CTO with a well-defined tapered proximal cap, length of about 20 millimeters. There is a small diffusely diseased distal vessel, and there is actually also a diagonal branch originating close to the distal cap. The filling of the distal vessel goes through septal collaterals, and our plan, given the well-defined proximal cap and the relatively short occlusion length, was to start with Antegrade wiring. If that didn't work, go retrograde and leave ADR for the end, given the small size of the distal vessel. So we tried with the Corsair XS along with the Fielder XTA guide wire. And despite multiple attempts and despite also using a Gaia wire, the wire kept on entering on the extraplaque space. So we eventually decided to go retrograde, as the patient did have good septal collaterals filling the LAD, and crossing retrograde could also help us preserve the patency of some of the septal collaterals as well as the diagonal branches. We did try a Sion black guide wire. We did do multiple attempts to cross, and then eventually the wire did seem to start going along the right direction, following the pathway of a septal. And now it is moving towards the LAD. So that was a great development. However, at this point, the patient, who was very stable with a blood pressure in the 140 range systolic, started having ST segment elevation, and also very quickly she became hypotensive with a systolic blood pressure in the 70s. So what is going on and what should be the next step? And this is one of the situations that does require emergency action to prevent irreversible damage. And the first suspicion should be for injury of the donor vessel. We actually took a quick path, which we did not store given the urgency of the moment, but there was slow flow on the right coronary artery. So we very quickly placed a 3.0 by 22 millimeter drug-eluting stent in the proximal to mid RCA, and that improved the flow somewhat, but we can still see that there is suboptimal flow in the right coronary artery, likely because of guide-induced dissection. So we did place an additional stent, a 3.0 by 30 millimeter drug-eluting stent, and this did restore good TIMI3 flow into the right coronary artery, which resulted in resolution of the hypotension. The patient's blood pressure improved. Of course, we also gave some pressures, and then eventually the ST segment elevation further resolved. So here we are now with an averted crisis. We were able to restore the flow in the right coronary artery. The patient is now stable again, and we're still left with an LAD CTO. One option would be to stop at this point, and there's definitely nothing wrong with that. Actually, having a complication is one of the indications for potentially stopping the procedure. At the same time, we had the problem solved. The patient was stable. So we decided to keep on going, but for very obvious reasons, avoid repeat retrograde crossing. So we tried Antegrade wiring again. We tried with the Gladius Mongo guide wire. And our plan here was to actually eventually do ADR, knuckle the tip of the wire, and then perform reentry in the mid LAD. We can see here that the wire did form a loop, advance further down. And then we did want to confirm the position of the wire. So we did a contralateral injection from the right coronary artery. And we can see very nicely that the wire is moving in sync, is essentially dancing in sync with the LAD. We had difficulty delivering the Corsair. We had to balloon with a 1.0 millimeter Sapphire, then got the Corsair in, and then we delivered a 300 centimeter long Miracle 6 wire, which is used mainly for this purpose, which is to deliver the Stingray balloon. But once we advanced the Miracle, it seemed to advance very easily down the course of the LAD. So we did a contralateral injection and it seemed to be in the right spot. So we changed it for a workhorse guide wire. This is a Sion blue that was inserted. And then we saw that the Sion blue was moving into various branches very easily without bending at the tip. So that was fairly reassuring that we were actually into the distal true lumen. So this is an example where we were extraplaque, but then just by advancing a Miracle 6 wire, we were able to re-enter. Technically, this would be a form of last or limited Antegrade subetima tracking, but essentially happened by chance. Our goal, as I mentioned before, was to actually use the Miracle to deliver the Stingray balloon. This is how the LAD looks after ballooning. There's some dissection, but we're clearly in true lumen and there's good flow distally. We do have, as we knew, a large diagonal branch that we need to preserve. So to do that, we used a Sasuke dual lumen microcatheter and advanced a workhorse guide wire into this diagonal branch. And then we stand it across the origin of the diagonal with a small stent. The reason for having a 2.0 stent, which we use very infrequently, was to prevent dissection distally. And then we post-dilated the stent with a 2.5 and 2.75 millimeter balloon. And now we have good flow in the LAD, but there is pinching of the ostium of the diagonal. How to take care of that? We needed to post-dilate, so we used once again the Sasuke dual lumen microcatheter. That helped us cross into the side branch with a workhorse wire. If that didn't work, we would use typically a polymer jacketed wire like a Sion black. But then after a few efforts, we were actually able to advance the workhorse wire into the diagonal branch. Again, the dual lumen microcatheter helps not only to direct the wire, but also it helps prevent entry of the wire under the proximal stent struts. And here it is advancing along the course of the trapped wire, which was then subsequently removed. We did the kissing balloon inflation that provided a decent result, so we did not think we had to place a stent into the origin of the diagonal branch. And then placed one more stent into the proximal LAD to completely cover the area of dissection, being careful to avoid double jailing this diagonal branch. And this provided a nice result with TIMI3 flow into the LAD and also good TIMI3 flow into the diagonal without any significant stenosis. We also looked at the right coronary artery again that appeared fine without any significant problems. So many lessons from this case. The most important is about monitoring. The reason that this patient went well and did not have a major complication is that we realized the hypotension fairly quickly and made the differential diagnosis fairly quickly, which was dissection in this case, likely because of the guide catheter on the right coronary artery, which was the donor vessel. Donor vessel dissection and decreased flow can literally be a lethal complication because a lot of the heart muscle depends on the donor vessel. But taking quick action and placing a stent literally saved the day, and that was facilitated by having a safety wire. So once we realized about the problem, we quickly took out the retrograde wire. We did have a safety wire into the right coronary artery and quickly placed stents. It does not matter if the stents are perfectly sized or not. What matters is the speed. Having the stents in quickly, as was done in this case, successfully stabilized the patient and prevented bad outcomes. If the patient had complete compromise and needed to go on ECMO, then obviously outcomes would have been much worse. Another lesson is that perhaps we could have tried more Antegrade before switching to retrograde. So it is clear that retrograde does have increased risk compared with Antegrade, and that's why it should always be undertaken with caution. And finally, we did have a bifurcation of the distal cap of the CTO, and we did use the dual lumen Sasuke microcatheter for being able to wire the side branch both at the beginning as well as after jailing with the stent and perform kissing balloon inflation and optimization. Thank you.